They thought it was just a family picture until historians looked closer at the father. In March 2024, Dr. Sarah Bennett sat in the climate-controlled archive room of the Boston Historical Society, carefully sorting through a large collection of Victorian-era photographs. The pictures had been donated by the estate of Eleanor Whitmore, who had passed away at the age of 97. The donation contained more than 200 images covering 4 generations of the Whitmore family and their friends. Most were ordinary daguerreotypes and tintypes, stiff portraits of serious-faced families dressed in their Sunday best, frozen by the long exposure times of 19th-century cameras. But one photograph dated 1892 caught her attention at once and held it so strongly that she put down her coffee and leaned closer. The image showed a family of 5 posed in a richly decorated parlor that clearly belonged to a wealthy household. The father sat in the center in a high-backed leather chair. His wife stood to his right, and their 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, were arranged around them. All were dressed in formal black mourning clothes. At first glance, it looked like a typical Gilded Age family portrait, the kind, rich Boston families ordered to display their success and respectability. Yet something felt deeply wrong. Sarah had spent 15 years studying 19th-century photography and had examined thousands of such images. The father's posture was too rigid even for Victorian standards that required people to stay completely still. His hands rested oddly on the armrests, fingers placed in a forced way. The children's faces did not show the usual discomfort of holding a pose or the normal serious look of the time. Instead, they showed fear poorly hidden as solemnity. She picked up her magnifying glass and studied the father's face. His eyes were open and staring at the camera, as was customary, but they held an unmistakable emptiness. There was no catchlight, no tiny reflection of light that appears in living eyes. Only a vacant, glassy stare that seemed to look through the camera into some distant place only the dead can see. Her hands began to tremble as the truth became clear. This was not an ordinary family portrait. It was a post-mortem photograph taken after death. Sarah carefully removed the photograph from its protective sleeve using cotton gloves and carried it to the archive's digital microscope. At 50 times magnification, details invisible to the naked eye became shockingly clear. The dark stain on the father's collar was not a photographic flaw or a shadow. It was blood that had soaked into the white starched fabric and dried to a rust-brown color. Someone had tried to wipe it away, but faint marks remained. His skin had the waxy, unnatural look of death that powder and lighting could not fully hide. Along his jawline, under the carefully styled beard, were faint discolorations that looked like bruises or marks of trauma. His lips were slightly parted in a way that seemed forced, as if someone had moved them by hand to make them look peaceful. The wife stood beside her dead husband with her hand resting on his shoulder in what was meant to appear as a supportive gesture. But the tension in her fingers was clear, her knuckles pressed white into the fabric of his jacket. Her face, though carefully composed, showed signs of recent tears, slight puffiness around the eyes and tightness in the jaw. The 3 children told their own stories. The oldest boy, about 15, stood with his hands clenched into fists, his face showing anger barely held back. The middle boy, around 12, had hollow, traumatized eyes. The youngest, a girl of about 8, stood closest to her mother with an expression of deep fear and confusion that made Sarah's own eyes water. This was not ordinary Victorian mourning. Something far darker had happened. Sarah shifted the microscope to the background of the parlor. The room was richly furnished with heavy velvet curtains, ornate wallpaper in burgundy and gold, and a marble fireplace. On the mantel, partly hidden by a large vase of funeral flowers, sat a stack of papers. At maximum magnification, one word stood out clearly at the top of a document: inquest. An inquest meant an official investigation into a suspicious death. Why would such papers appear, even partly, in a private family memorial photograph? Sarah spent the rest of that day and most of the next trying to identify the family. The photograph itself had no names or labels. The only clue was the photographer's stamp on the back: Morrison & Sons Fine Photography, 47 Tremont Street, Boston, 1892. She checked digitized city directories and found that Morrison & Sons had been a well-known studio serving Boston's wealthy from 1875 to 1904. Their detailed client ledgers had been donated to the Massachusetts State Archives. The next morning, she went to the archives in Dorchester. An experienced archivist named Thomas brought out the ledgers. After careful searching through elegant 19th century handwriting, she found the entry for October 15, 1892, Memorial Portrait Commission for Mr. James Caldwell, deceased, of 84 Beacon Street. The family included the deceased, his wife, and 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. Special instructions called for the subject to be photographed seated with the family arranged around him. 12 prints were ordered and paid for in full by Mrs. Catherine Caldwell. The cost was $45, a very large sum at the time. Sarah now had names and an address. She searched the Boston Globe's digital archives. The first headline stopped her. Prominent businessman found dead in Beacon Hill home, dated October 12, 1892. James Caldwell, age 43, owner of Caldwell Manufacturing Company, had been found unresponsive in his private study early on the morning of October 11th by his wife, Catherine. The family doctor pronounced him dead. The first reported cause was heart failure, though he had no known heart problems. Because of the unexpected nature of the death and certain circumstances at the scene, the Suffolk County Medical Examiner ordered a formal inquest for October 14th. Police conducted a preliminary investigation. Follow-up articles were brief. On October 15th, the inquest concluded, and on October 18th, the death was ruled accidental, no criminal charges. The official findings stated that James had suffered a fatal fall in his study, striking his head hard enough to cause death. The family asked for privacy. The coverage felt deliberately thin for such a prominent case. 2 days later, Sarah examined the full inquest file at the Suffolk County Courthouse. The medical examiner's report, signed by Dr. Walter Hastings, was clinical and deeply disturbing. External examination showed a large bruise on the right temple with significant bleeding under the skin, consistent with strong blunt force trauma. Petechial hemorrhaging appeared in both eyes, usually linked to asphyxiation or strangulation. Multiple bruises around the front of the neck matched the pressure points of hands gripping the throat. Internal examination revealed a fractured hyoid bone, a strong indicator of strangulation rarely seen in accidents. The larynx showed trauma and bleeding. Brain examination confirmed the head blow occurred while James was still alive and would have been incapacitating but not immediately fatal. Defensive wounds, abrasions, and bruises marked his hands and knuckles, showing he had struggled. The examiner's conclusion was clear: the death was not natural or accidental. The pattern of injuries indicated homicide. James had been struck hard on the head and then strangled. Further criminal investigation was strongly recommended, yet the inquest had ruled it an accident. Sarah turned to the witness statements. Catherine Caldwell described a tense family dinner on October 10th. James barely ate and seemed troubled by business matters. He said he would handle problems with his partner, Henry Morton, involving irregularities in the company accounts. After dinner, he went to his study as usual. Catherine heard nothing during the night. In the morning, the housemaid Anna found him dead. The desk was disturbed, papers scattered, a lamp knocked over. Blood and bruises were visible on his collar, face, and throat. Their 15-year-old son William gave a short but devastating statement. He could not sleep, and around midnight heard 2 men arguing in the study, his father and Henry Morton. He heard words about stolen money, betrayal, and going to the authorities. The voices grew louder. Furniture moved as if in a struggle, then a heavy thud and complete silence. About 10 minutes later, he heard the front door open and close. From a hallway window, he saw Morton walking quickly away, almost running, and looking back at the house. William was too frightened to wake his mother or check on his father. He returned to his room and did not sleep. The next morning, when Anna found the body, he knew he should have done something and would regret it for the rest of his life. The housemaid Anna Schmidt confirmed everything William had said. She also heard the voices and saw Morton leave late at night. Despite the medical evidence and the eyewitness accounts that placed Morton at the scene with a clear motive of financial fraud, the inquest called the death accidental. Notes added later by an archivist explained the reason. Henry Morton's brother-in-law was Judge Theodore Blackwell, one of Boston's most powerful men. The Morton family had deep connections throughout city government, the police, and the district attorney's office. Witnesses were intimidated. Anna Schmidt left Boston suddenly and was never seen again. Catherine Caldwell tried to pursue justice but received threats against her children. The photograph now made perfect sense. Catherine ordered it 3 days after the false ruling. She deliberately included the inquest documents in the frame. She refused to let the undertaker completely clean her husband's body so the blood and bruises would remain visible. She positioned her traumatized children around their father's corpse so their faces would show the truth of what had happened. It was her testimony to history, her evidence preserved across 132 years. In November 2024, Sarah organized an exhibition at the Boston Historical Society titled Hidden Truths: The James Caldwell Murder. She displayed the photograph together with all the evidence she had uncovered. The exhibition drew wide public attention and finally gave Catherine Caldwell the justice she had fought for. Jennifer Parker, William's great-great-granddaughter, flew in from Oregon for the opening. Standing before the photograph of her ancestor, she wept. "Catherine knew," she said quietly. "She knew that someday someone would look closely enough to see the truth. Thank you for being that person. Thank you for giving my family closure after 132 years." The photograph had done exactly what Catherine intended. It had preserved the truth through generations of silence, waiting for someone to finally see what had always been there, hidden in plain sight.